Well, we are back. Good morning, everyone. Back to the Nerd Out. It's good to be back.
Good to have you
Monday
back.
morning. How are things going?
Wonderful. I've got my coffee. I'm ready. It was Valentine's weekend this last weekend, which is beautiful for a lot of people. Maybe not beautiful for other people in that sense, but favorite candy bar of all time.
I love Toblerone. That's my
I'm sorry, what?
Toblerones are my favorite.
Is that the brown
Yeah.
wrapper one, longer one?
Yep. Little mountains.
What's in that?
They're Swiss. They're like this
The mountains. I do
nugget
remember that.
chocolate deliciousness in a candy bar.
Deliciousness wrapped up in a
Yeah.
package. I love it. All right. So Snickers is always a go-to. I do love Kit Kats. I don't know why,
Kit Kats are good.
but I'm a chocolate person. So I don't like, my kids love like the Sour Patch and all that type stuff. And I've never, it's okay. But
This is a divisive question. How do you eat a Kit Kat? Do you break it off one at a time?
one
or?
brick at a time.
Okay.
Yeah. You can't do, I mean, I've done it before when I've bitten out of two at a time and it just feels wrong.
Gotcha.
So, but one at a time. Yeah.
Good. You've passed that test.
Okay.
Not only was it Valentine's weekend, it was also Arizona's birthday. I feel like that often gets overshadowed.
It gets overlooked. How
Um,
old are we now? 102, 110, something like that.
We don't look a day
We're between
over.
100 and we don't look a day. We don't.
We don't. We look good. What's your favorite thing about living in Arizona?
The springtime, actually, what we're getting ready to go into. I love it's warming up a little bit, although I'm sad that I'm going to have to shed long sleeve shirts and stuff here in a little while. But springtime is always a fun time to me.
Yeah, those
Springtime best
2 days of spring are pretty lovely. It's
Yes,
pretty nice.
before summer arrives.
Yes. Yeah. No,
Not
we
a
do
huge
have
fan
good
of the
springs.
summer, but I'll take it. It's better than shoveling.
That is true. I agree. I've also lived here my whole life, so I pretty much have to say that because
Yeah,
I don't have
you
anything
pretty
to
much
compare
have
it to. But
No.
you lived in Colorado, so you know
Born
what
in
it's like
Pennsylvania,
to
lived in
shovel.
Colorado, but here is home. I mean, most of our time's been here, but did have to shovel, and my sister-in-law and brother-in-law live in Louisville. They just had 4 inches of snow yesterday, so here we are shoveling sunshine out here.
Yeah. Gotta love Arizona. Well, last night we kicked off our brand new series, The Devil's Playbook. Kind of a kickoff after the Super Bowl weekend that we had and going the playbook that the devil has. And, John says that the thief comes to steal, kill, and destroy. And that is the end game of wanting to distract and tempt us and really to pull us away from our Savior. And so what inspired or what's the context for this series?
A few months back, just thinking through things, we try to have a pretty healthy biblical diet. And it's been 3 or 4 years since we've talked about kind of spiritual warfare side of things and the reality that it is a battle that we are all in. We don't try to figure out if we're going to be involved. We are involved in it. And so it just felt like it was the right time to circle back and look at that. And then looking at the idea of this 3-week series on distraction, temptation, and isolation, that those are 3 key tactics that the enemy will use to bring division or disunity or detouring us away from God's best and keeping our devotion up and our distractions down like we were looking at last night. So,
And I think when we talk about spiritual warfare, you brought up the quote by C.S. Lewis where we can either put not enough stock in it or too much. And I know that to be true in my own life as well as those around me. How can we find that healthy balance of putting him, acknowledging that we are in a spiritual warfare, but also not giving him too much power?
Too much credit. I think it's important for us to realize that the battle is real, that there is a real enemy, but he really is a defeated enemy. And so we talked about the psych ops, that he'll play a lot of head games and trying to distract, hence what we were looking at last night. But to get us to get our focus and our devotion off of Jesus and onto a plethora of other things, lesser things. And so it's a matter of having a balanced approach to life, that I'm not a believer that there's a demon behind every bush or every bad thing that happens. Listen, we live in a broken world, bad things happen. But the reality is there are forces at play that are trying to influence cultures, societies, individuals, families, and we can't ignore that. And so it's not ignore the devil and he'll flee from you. It's resist the devil. And so there has to be some active resistance from me individually and active resistance from the church to push back darkness. That's what we're called to be. And Jesus said, you're the city on a hill. And so we're to shine, let your good works shine in a way that people would see your Father and see him in heaven. And so there is some pushback that we need to do as the church and as followers of Jesus. So it's that invitation to the spiritual life, the Christian life, as a participatory life. And so we don't have to, we get to participate in pushing back against darkness and being alerted to it. And so that's what Peter says, be alert and sober-minded, that this is really going on. And so you've got to give some attention to it, but don't get fascinated by it. Keep your fascination and your devotion on the greater thing, not the lesser thing, which is God himself.
Absolutely. And I think when we talk about spiritual warfare, it is important, the context of Ephesians 6, where it says we do not wrestle against flesh and blood.
Correct.
That when we understand that there really is opposition from the enemy, and that it isn't flesh and blood, it isn't people.
Right.
It can be through people, but like understanding the real enemy at play, I think being able to contextualize that is important for us to be able to really resist him and not, people are hard, but they're not the enemy. And that is really hard to always, for me, that's a hard thing to wrestle with.
It's difficult for me. It's difficult for anyone that's human. If you got skin and you're human and you get your feelings hurt or you feel pushed back against it, it's really easy to drift into painting other people as the enemy and beginning to see them or view them that way and approach your interactions with them that way. And the truth is, it's always going back to the created order. We are created in the image of God. That doesn't mean we don't have brokenness that shines through, or even some evil malice or intent that shines through people in their brokenness. But they're still made in the image of God. And so they have value because God says so, even if their actions and things that they carry out are anti-God or against his best. And so it's realizing that there could be a whole lot of influence behind that that's stirring that up. So we know that from, I know I've gone through some counseling. I know counseling's been a part of your background too. And so you realize the more you read on that, that there are some past patterns, whether it's either some biology things within a person or environmental things outside of a person that begins to influence and feed that brokenness. That's part of the cosmic powers that are at play that are beginning to try to influence and sway people to live out that brokenness and therefore cause harm or heartache that feeds itself upon others and others suffer by. And so it's not an easy topic to tackle and to talk about, but it's a necessary reality of the world in which we live, that we live in a broken world and we're surrounded by broken people, beautiful people. And so therefore we have to remember, okay, they're made in the image of God just as much as I am. And so their value is given because of God creating and saying and establishing they are created by me, and their value is there. Now, the brokenness of things that happen and things that play out could be a stem of a whole lot of issues. But
and I think it's also important to understand why the enemy is attacking us and his motivation, his tactics, which we'll get into in a little bit. But like his motivation is to keep you away from the best thing of Christ.
Correct.
Like that is his end game. Like, and he'll do anything to make that happen.
Yeah.
And I think that's important to understand. I think it was A.W. Pink or A.W. Tozer, somebody awesome, once said that
Someone with initials.
somebody amazing, once said that if you are not under attack of the enemy, it's because you pose no threat to the kingdom. And for me, like that's always been a reminder of like if you are experiencing opposition, it's probably because you've stepped out in an opportunity that the Lord has for you, and that you are a threat to the kingdom. And so I think like that's something encouraging while you are going through opposition, to understand that like he's not going to attack you if you're already away from the Lord. Like the enemy wants to take those that are the city on a hill. And so I think it's really important just to be mindful of that when we are, sharing the gospel, when we are, fulfilling the purposes of the church. Kind of a call back to our last series. Like when we're doing those things, the enemy's going to attack. Like that's his goal. And yet when we lean into and turn up the volume of Christ, like greater is he that is in you than he that is in the world. And so, you quickly went through some of the ways that of tactics that the devil uses to distract. Can you remind us a few of those, or like the more prominent ones that we can wrestle with?
We listed a whole bunch, and they're on the sermon notes too that you can go back and catch. But I think distraction of past pain and heartache that people don't get healed from has a way of lingering and festering within us, and therefore kind of boiling over and spilling over into the people around us, and causing harm, causing disorder, causing disarray within relationships. And I think that's a big one. I think the emotional turmoil that we kind of highlighted Jonathan Haidt's book, The Anxious Generation, which again is not necessarily a Christian book, but the research done on it, the reality of the waters in which we all swim, and in our technologically soaked society, that our brains are being rewired in a lot of ways. And I think the enemy can try to take those waters and stir up a lot of emotional stuff within us, that if we don't become someone who's regulating our emotions in a healthy way, then it can begin to spill over and impact others, or begins to make us emotionally paralyzed, that we cease to move forward on anything, and we feel overwhelmed, and therefore we just stop, and we may not give up on life, but we kind of give up, and we become a doormat or dormant in our faith. And so there's that. I think anything that we talked about, the idea of an idol is anything that we have elevated above God being the greater thing, and everything else being lesser things. And that was the call back to Mary and Martha in Luke chapter 10, that it wasn't that what Martha was doing in hosting a dinner party was wrong. It was getting so anxious and worked up about a lesser thing, when the greater thing, Jesus, was there in her midst, and she was distracted away from Jesus. Put out a cheese tray or some, what do you call the charcuterie board, and let it be enough, versus making. So it's not that you can't do that, but it is this idea of, am I allowing distractions in my life to steal me away from putting my focus on the greater thing, God and his goodness and his greatness, his presence, and I become distracted and pursuing lesser things, and I begin elevating them above God, or giving more of my time or my energy, my focus to those things.
And in the account with Mary and Martha, we see how the enemy won in that situation, because, like you said, like what she was doing wasn't a bad thing.
No.
But by being distracted from Jesus, what led her to missing out on the best thing was also her bitterness towards Mary,
her sister.
So I think like that's really the sin that
Correct.
Was being called out by Jesus in that moment and that I think is so easy for us, is when we are distracted, then we like follow that up with bitterness towards others, or resentment or anger or or some other unhealthy emotion. So I think it's really, that account is such a good example of what happens when we do get distracted, is that, it starts in the head game, but then it does come out in actions of
Correct.
this bitterness towards like Mary. Jesus, tell her to help me. And so I think like just that anger that came out of that is a good example of what happens when we give into that distraction.
Agreed. I think that's the allure of distraction in general. And distraction, you got to think of it is part of the head game of the enemy to get us lured away. Louis Giglio talks about the idea that the devil works in luring and lying. And it's the luring away to other things, giving our attention. So last night we talked about the idea of how do we turn up our devotion to God and how do we turn down distractions. And that's going to be different for each one of us. I'm gave you a few of the things I'm working on for me. It's going to be figuring that out. Like for me, it's one of the things I try to do most mornings is I'll take a 2 to 3 mile walk. And sometimes I'm listening to an audiobook. Sometimes I'm listening to nature, sometimes worship music. Sometimes it's just a prayer time. So it varies because I'm somewhat creative, and so I don't like staleness. So I like to have a variety of things, but at the same time, that's my time just to kind of be still and kind of orient and center myself, whatever you want to call it. But just to be with God and be alerted to the things that are stirring within me, and owning up to my own distractions. And yeah, I said it in the sermon, but I was walking the last week and I'm having an imaginary conversation with someone who's not there, and I'm winning. And it was just like God tapped me on the shoulder. It was like, hey, why don't you trust me with that? Why are you trying to solve something that you cannot solve? It's above your pay grade, and you're putting too much stock in that. You need to put more trust in me. And it was like just a fresh reminder of like, yeah, God, you're totally right. And I need to own that. And so that's become a distraction. And I'm trying to solve it, fix it, because that's partly how I'm wired, to try to fix. And I can't fix that one. So I need to trust you that you can fix it if it's meant to be fixed. And
I think that's a gorgeous example of that intimacy with the Lord. When we turn up that devotion dial and we are all in with Him, and we put the distractions aside and we prioritize the Lord, how much the intimate, the kindness of the Lord to speak truth, to illuminate His word to us, to just to share with us, and like just those sweet times of worship with Him. Like there is something beautiful,
right?
And like that's the Lord. That's what He wants from us. He, John 11 said, like Jesus says, "I've come to give you life and life to the full, life abundantly." And like part of that is wanting our devotion. Like He wants to give us more truth to solve the problems of the world, to alleviate evil, and to further His kingdom. Like He has plans, and yet I think so often we succumb to distractions.
And I think that's the beauty, the intimacy side of that. The more you walk with Jesus and are leaning on God and wanting to have this interplay of a relationship with Him, with the Holy Spirit, it's remembering it's God's kindness that leads us to repentance. God's voice will be a convicting voice, but not a condemning voice. And that's the voice of the enemy, is a condemning voice. You're bad. You're evil. You'll never get this right. Versus, hey, what you did there was not the best. And it's the Holy Spirit's voice of kindness and conviction that says, that was off kilter. I have something better for you. And why don't you trust me with that? Let's work on this. And that's what grows that intimacy, to want to connect with God. and to enjoy the beauty of that.
Mhm. Beautiful. And I think being able to hear his voice, it's not always louder.
Correct.
In fact, most often it's not.
Mhm.
And so it is a competing, especially in our
Full busy
chaotic
world. Yep.
busyness world,
Mhm.
like Jesus has a still small voice.
Correct.
It is he
That's
speaks
the
in
story of Elijah.
whispers.
Yep.
And for us to be able to hear that, like you have to do something additional, like you
Yeah.
have to turn it down.
Yeah.
I think that's something too of like it's not either or.
Correct.
You do have to do both,
Right.
which is hard.
Mhm.
And I think it's also interesting that that's an active thing that we need to do. It's not just gonna, God's not just gonna speak louder.
Correct.
We need to. It is an issue of the heart of like, do I love and trust the Lord enough to turn down the distractions, to turn off my phone, to hold off people for a little bit or whatever the source of the distraction is.
Right.
And then am I also prioritizing my quiet times with him? Am I, actively seeking out ways to hear him better? So I think it definitely takes both. The dialing up and dialing down. Love that analogy. You had alluded to the serenity prayer last night. Where did that come from, and how can we apply that to this context?
Yeah. So the serenity prayer is steeped in, I don't know if this is where it originated from with the AA movement. I think it's tied to that a lot. And so I'll say maybe the deepest roots of it are in that. And typically we'll know the shorter version of it, but the longer version of that prayer that we put up on the screen and you can Google and find is a helpful reset moment. So as we were talking about, some of the application from last night was I encouraged myself to have a when-then reality in life, that when you find yourself distracted or wrapped up in that, it's not a matter of going, oh man, and beating yourself up. It's not a guilt thing of condemning yourself of, man, I totally blew it. I got on my phone for 10 minutes and then here it is an hour later. And I've just gone down this rabbit hole of lost time and I'm lost in distraction or whatever that may be. The reality is, okay, when you find yourself in distraction, then figure out small ways to begin to turn up the dial of devotion in that moment of coming out of distraction. Okay, yeah, I got distracted. But when I get there, then let's try to do something. So serenity prayer was one particular practice that I'm reading a book called Steps. John Ortberg wrote, and I'm 3/4 of the way through it right now. But it's modeled off the 12 steps from AA, and the serenity prayer, I think, was part of step 3. And it's recognizing I can't, God can. And it's trying to bring a premise and a sense of awareness to our own life. And so maybe utilizing that prayer as a moment of a reset moment. Sometimes I'll use just reciting to myself the Lord's Prayer as a reset moment, or Psalm 23, memorizing that and using that as a reset. I mentioned the Pause app that I've downloaded. I know you've used that too.
It's the best.
And it's John Eldridge, and there's a woman's voice as well. And they just kind of guide you through a minute or 2 minutes or 3 minutes moment of prayer. And so it's just hitting pause. And for some of us, like I know I've try to do it in the morning, and then I'll try to do it like halfway through the day somewhere in the lunchtime to afternoon. I don't do it every day, but just trying to turn up the dial of devotion and find little ways, little pockets of time where I can do that. I'll take a prayer walk. I got to do that in the morning, and I'm not praying the entire time, so it's not like that. But I'll try to center my prayer life in that chunk. I told you I drive with like hardly
music.
The radio, like I hardly ever have the radio on, which I know is weird. My family thinks I'm weird for that.
I tried it on my way over here, which is a short drive, mind you, and it was painful. It takes some practice.
It was painful.
Does it get better?
It does get better, and actually becomes really delightful. So listen, that's not for everybody. You may love music more than I do, and that's okay. But for me, it's just think time as well as prayer time. I'm just open and trying to listening to God's voice, and I'm the kid who daydreamed a lot growing up, and so it's kind of my daydream time, and so that's still part of the creative side of me. Now that may drive you nuts, and that's okay. Find a different rhythm or a different practice. So yeah.
Yeah. I think it's important to find something that works for you.
Mhm.
I think we can list off there's all sorts of ways
Totally.
to turn up devotion, turn down distractions, but finding something that works for you, that's realistic. You
Mhm.
know, you had said last night a couple times of like, we can't just eliminate all distractions.
No, it's impossible.
We live in a world.
Right.
And so we can't just completely unplug entirely, but there are practical things that we can do to and I think it really is a prioritization of our hearts. Like, do we care more about the Lord, to give him the credit that he's due, to give him our attention, to give
Mhm.
him our hearts?
Yeah. We are in the attention economy.
Mhm.
You'll hear that phrase everywhere. And so the truth is, what you give your attention to will get your devotion of your heart. And that's the premise behind this whole deal, is that let God be the greater thing. Therefore, let him get that's the Psalm 27:4. You know, this one thing I seek, God, that I may dwell in the house of the Lord forever and gaze upon the beauty of you in your temple. That it's not the idea of, okay, I'm in church every single moment of every day, but it is this idea that my deepest attention would be upon the one who deserves my deepest devotion. And so I don't want God to have the leftovers. I don't want God to get the scraps, um, because I live in a busy, fast-paced, cluttered, chaotic culture that we all have to navigate. And so, in the context of that, how do I find ways to turn up devotion to the greater thing and turn down the distractions of the lesser things in my life? And it's not that I can't have distractions. It's not that I can't take a break and veg out or go see a movie or hang out with friends, but and even to grow in our awareness that sometimes it's distractions that God brings across our path as a moment and an opportunity to serve someone or an opportunity to minister to someone. So it's not that if God were to bring the distraction of your day gets interrupted by someone or something that you go, get behind me, Satan. Like it's not this idea, but uh, it is the opportunity and the invitation for us to go, okay, what am I getting more constantly distracted by in life? So I mentioned the idea of doing a time audit, which is a scary thing to think about. What if you were to lay out on a piece of paper, okay, here's what I do with my week. Here's where my time goes. And you just honestly look at that and go, okay, Monday, I spent X number of hours doing this. And, and then over a course of a week, just go, okay, here's my week. Does this match or mirror the devotion I want to the greater things, or am I giving my devotion to lesser things? And then have an honest conversation with you and God and go, okay, how do I turn up my devotion to the greater things, to God? And how do I turn down maybe some of the distractions that have been captivating me? So I know for me, like, I'm going to say it again right now because I need the accountability, is I've been on socials since 2010. And I'm going to give that up for Lent this year. And part of Lent, the invitation, the beautiful part of that, part of our Christian calendar, is the invitation to go, okay, spend 40 days thinking and anticipating the resurrection of Christ, the beauty of what God's given us all in Jesus. And so maybe you want to give up some things. And so people talk about fasting. I'm going to fast from social media, which will be, I'm telling myself right now, it's going to be hard for me. I'm going to have to delete it off my phone. I can't move it to another page in my phone. I tried that over sabbatical and I still found myself going back to it. Like, I'm going to have to literally delete it off my phone because it's part of how I'm wired now. Like it's been so much a part of me. And so I've got to figure that out. And it's not a legalistic thing, but for me, I'm realizing I've got to do a recalibration of my own heart because I can get lost in this and it can become consuming to the point that's detrimental to my devotion of my heart for God. And so for me, this is the practice I'm going to try. And if you want to do it with me, then I'll have another fool with me who's doing that. But and that's not to shame you if you don't want to do it. Don't do it. But find ways. You're going to have to get skin in the game to figure some of this out. So it is an active, participatory reality of the Christian life. And so we can say we want to turn down distractions, but if you don't put action steps to that, it's not going to get turned down. That's the truth. And so you got to find ways and find practices and opportunities to go, okay, how do I turn down the distractions the enemy's kind of throwing my way, or culture's throwing my way, or society's throwing my way, that's keeping me from trying to turn up my devotion to Christ. And then how do I turn up my devotion to Christ? So, hey, I've never been part of an e-group before. Maybe pursuing God in community is a healthy thing. And so maybe it's taking a step to get involved in e-group, or you come to church once a month. That's your reg, or regular for Gen Zers. I don't know if that's even a Gen Z term. Forgive me. But maybe you only come once a month. What would it look like to double that? Come twice a month and to go, okay, I'm going to try to dial up my devotion and try to participate more in those things. Find small steps. Do you remember the movie, What About Bob? Was it What About Bob? I think so. Bill Murray, and he's always like baby steps. Like he was trapped in fear all the time. And his psychologist was just saying, you got to have baby steps, Bob. And so it's baby steps to the elevator, baby steps down the street. Just find some baby steps for you of what does it look like to turn down distraction, some baby steps of what does it look like to turn up devotion.
Nice. Definitely doing those, again, just doing those in tandem. You can't do one without the other. So like if you do give up social media for 40 days, like replace it. Because that's what when we talk about fasting, and fasting, the scripture is called like a sacrifice of praise. Like it is a act of worship for the Lord.
Mm-hmm.
But to do that, like the reason that, Jesus fasted was so that he would spend more time doing something else, or doing, prayer
with the Father,
with the Father, or communing with him. So when we do, fast from something, it is replacing it with something else. And I think that the time audit is one of the best ways to go about that. And I have my students do that just for teaching time management. We have them do a weekly planner, and each box has to be filled for how you spend your time. And it's always illuminating how much we're so busy. And yet, like when we do a time audit, you see, I have a gap here, or I commute, or like this is it is illuminating when you like truly list off how you spend your time.
Yep.
And so I think that's highly recommend just that time audit, and just to being mindful of how busy we are. I've heard the acronym busy, being under Satan's yoke.
I haven't heard that one.
And how, going back to the Corrie ten Boom, like if he can't make you bad, he'll make you busy. And that's being under Satan's yoke. Like he wants you busy. He wants you distracted. And so
you're preoccupied when you're busy.
Yeah.
And listen, Jesus was a busy rabbi in the sense that like he wasn't sitting still all the time. He was, he was busy, but not hurried, because he always had time for the interruptions. That's where a lot of his miracles happened, were those interruptions that happen. And interruptions are going to be part of your life. That doesn't mean they're a distraction. It means they're an interruption. And maybe God's at work in the midst of that interruption. How can you partner with him in that? But the idea of busyness, being under Satan's yoke, that's good. And just remembering, okay, I don't want to be so busy or so busied by all the distractions that I miss out on trying to grow my relationship with God.
So we encourage you all, be thinking of like the tactics that the enemy uses to dilute devotion to the Lord, and also just ways you can practically turn up that devotion. What can
Yeah.
you do this week, baby step, to be able to really devote and press into the gospel. The key takeaways, I forgot to do at the beginning. So
You're
if
good.
you're
We'll do it
doing it
now.
at the end,
We'll do it at the
a
end.
nice good recap
Totally fine.
of
And I have
the
one story
of
to
the
share.
sermon. Oh, let's do that next
Okay,
while I can find the takeaways.
do it. Do it.
What's our last?
So I didn't get to share this at the end of the message. So in the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York, there's a copper engraving by German artist Albrecht, which is a fun first name, Albrecht Dürer, from 1513. The engraving is a picture of a knight kind of riding down a narrow gorge, and flanked on both sides of him is a goat-headed devil and the rotting corpse of death, seeking to lay claim to him. But both those evils are not able to take advantage of him. Why? Because his fixed view is on the city on the hill, the castle on the hill that's out in front of him. It's his father's kingdom, his identity, it's his final estate. And so evil is there all around him, but the shadows can't lay claim to him because he is not a distracted knight. He is focused on the greater thing that's out in front of him. And so the reality is, if we will do our part to keep doing what Jesus said in the Sermon on the Mount, seek ye first the kingdom of God, and all this other stuff will be attitude, meaning God's going to take care of you. Seek him first. Fix your gaze upon him and the goodness of God, and give your devotion to that. Turn up the dial of devotion. Then the distractions of the world that the enemy throws at you, we don't have to let that consume us. Those shadows might still be around us, but we don't have to give in to letting them detour us away from God's best in his identity that he calls us. We're his kid. Greater is he who is in us than he who is in the world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great illustration. Almost lost it.
You got it.
I got it. So our key takeaways for last night's series: distractions are a tactic the enemy uses to pull our focus away from God. We live in a culture where focus is increasingly challenging.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, this is the one that got me. God is more interested in our faithfulness than our efficiency. And then distractions dilute your devotion.
Mm-hmm.
So lots of amazing takeaways in last night's sermon. Next week, we are looking at temptation, correct?
Yep, we are. Lyle's going to be preaching that one.
That'll be
Excited about
exciting. Temptations. Yay.
It'll be good.
And I would just encourage everybody, anytime that a church teaches on spiritual warfare, the attacks are imminent for those that are teaching on it. So just definitely want to just cover you and Lyle in prayer this series, just because when you give attention to ways to oppose the enemy, the attacks are going to be imminent. So I'm just covering you both in prayer.
Awesome. We'll take it
for that.
And prayer for the church. Ephesians chapter 6, the spiritual armor that Paul talks about, the belt of truth, the breastplate of righteousness, helmet of salvation, sword of the Spirit, that it's we can put those on, but it's metaphorical in a sense of just owning, hey, we're in a battle. We're all in a battle, and we need to continue to dial up our devotion and keep our fixed gaze upon the greater thing. And worship is a great way. That's why our church has a heart for worship and to grow worshipers, because that really helps our devotion and helps us fixate on the right thing, the greater thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I forget who once said it. Worship is our warfare.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's so true. Of that's one of the best ways to fight the enemy.
Yes. It pushes back against the psych ops of the enemy, his attacks. So.
Great. Well, everybody, hope you have a delightful week, and we will see you soon. Soon.
Soon.